Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're joined by a highly respected friend, Nightmare Vision, who has returned from his forest hideaway to stop the steal. Nightmare, how are you feeling? Are you feeling white-pilled? Before the episode, you were saying, I don't subscribe to either black-pilled or white-pilled mentality. And I was like, that is wrong. You're either black-pilled or white-pilled. There is no option here. There is no centrist option here. So are you white-pilled or black-pilled?
I'm gonna have to go with Whitepills for this
good
afternoon.
Because otherwise the show would have ended. You're off the show if you're black-pilled. There are no black-pills allowed on Highly Respected, not on my timeline, not on my watch. We're staying positive because Trump will win, and he did win the election. So obviously, as some of you may have heard, America had an election last week, and Donald Trump came out on top up until a mysterious thing occurred at 4 a.m. of the night of the election. And some of these votes in big urban machines where there's a lot of corruption and fraud frequently seen, they all began going in a certain direction away from Trump. But, I don't want to necessarily dwell on the nuts and bolts of what happened in the election, because some of the things that we could discuss today could be out of date by the time that this thing is recorded, by the time that this is posted, by tomorrow. And a lot of people are going to be bored if we're talking about the minute details of what's going on in Arizona. So I just want to say is this: Trump won, but corrupt urban machines stole it from him. The only reason he will not remain president is if the GOP and the Supreme Court side with the corrupt urban machines and their elite backers against Trump. That's it. Simple as that's the line. Any deviations from that, and you are a black-pilled beta cuck. End of discussion. So, Nightmare, you have a couple of additional thoughts on this that you were talking before the show. Why don't you go in and explain some of that?
Well, no, I don't. I mean, I just didn't want. I think it's smart not to necessarily get into the minutia of exactly what happened in detail, because it's an evolving. It's going to be an evolving story over the next few weeks. So I do think it's wise not to jump into all of that right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And you were talking about how you were looking at all these returns coming in at 4 a.m. that people were wondering, it's why did these states in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia, why was there a sudden stop at 4 a.m. or in the early morning hours? And there were several other states that are similar, large states, huge infrastructures that they have to go through, many of the same issues that they have. Florida, Texas, and Ohio, they all got this wrapped up pretty quickly. And of course, all three states went for Trump pretty solidly. Yeah. These other states are having some issues that they, they just need to count it in a certain way. I think Arizona may be the most ridiculous example, where they just release ballots at random hours and here's an incoming. It's why wasn't this all just released a week ago? There's no reason for this to keep going on. There's never been a good reason to explain why they have these delays, why they're taking so long, why are there these major discrepancies between what all these watchers were saying, who are analysts of these state politics, and then they go completely another way. And Milwaukee, there's a good example, is that there was this Wisconsin reporter who's a liberal who was always saying that Trump will probably lose the state. And then, around 2 or 3 a.m., he's like, I'm looking at the gap right now. Trump was up by over 100,000 votes, and there's no way Biden can overcome this. And then the Milwaukee ballot suddenly appeared. He's like, oh, well, I guess I'm mistaken. So yeah, there's a lot of alarm bells that should be ringing for any sensible person, especially somebody who knows that a lot of these elections are marred by fraud and corruption. There's ballot stuffing that always occurs. There was some former congressman who's a prominent Democrat in Philadelphia who was just charged with ballot stuffing this summer. And people are just no, it's a free and fair election. Why would any of this happen? Are you trying to deny Black people the right to vote? And of course, going off.
That's going to be an argument. I mean, that's going to be an argument coming up. It's going to involve that, because a lot of these urban machine places are going to be, they have huge Black populations, and the Black turnout in these places ultimately have been rather significant. So significant that some of the things I'm reading is that the turnout was more than for Barack Obama in 2008. In some of these,
and some of these precincts in Wisconsin, they had more voters than residents.
Yeah, and
imagine that.
The general, I mean, yeah, I basically agree with what you're saying. I think the general argument being made here is that, like, I think the context is important here, right? Because so the media sought to normalize this kind of delay by using the pandemic and all of the, this kind of surge in mail-in ballots, which, I mean, there's really no stops with me anymore. I don't really believe in any of this consensus anymore. It's kind of over for me. So if you want to call me conspiratorial, whatever. At this point, I just wear that.
Powerful. He no longer believes the liberal media.
No,
this is a powerful moment.
I wear that as a badge of honor now. There's no consensus. Everything's up for grabs. Math, science. It's all just like it's all a political struggle between like competing ideologies at this point, and it's nakedly transparent. And so my point is, it kind of makes me even question the lockdowns in America. Like, I almost feel as if we kind of witnessed the, like the big event for which the American lockdowns at least were like implemented. And, that sounds very dramatic, but it's like, we just saw that kind of go down. At least that's how it looks. And so the media wants to normalize this delay. But there are like a few serious questions that they're just kind of conveniently ignoring. And that's mostly that, first of all, remember, they're all still wrong. They were all calling a Biden landslide, right? Nate Silver is still wrong. These people are all wrong.
Yeah,
they were telling
just to briefly interject, Nate Silver predicted in one of his last electoral maps that Trump only would win 125 electoral votes, like Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Iowa, Georgia, all these states just went, and Ohio all went for Biden in his electoral map. And it was completely wrong. And these poll shamans are now coming out. I was like, well, actually, we were right because we predicted Biden would win.
It's over. It's over, Scott. This is just a huge face-saving campaign. And they're trying to save face so much that they're tanking basically the legitimacy of the American electoral system just for this purpose, basically. And so all these people are wrong. The betting markets flipped. I mean, was anyone watching that? Like, I heard it. Everyone probably heard it, that like, oh, Biden is a shoo-in in the betting markets. And then election night, all of a sudden, Trump is at like 70%. And Biden claps through the floor, just like Hillary Clinton did. I remember, watching some of those compilations where, like, the night of the 2016 election, it was like Hillary was at like 99.999 repeating percent to win the election. And then, a few hours in, I remember, like, the Young Turks have to sit there while they're being told that actually now Trump is at 55% favored to win the election. And so there was this Biden landslide that was being predicted, this blue wave. None of it materialized. And in fact, it looked like on Tuesday night, the opposite was materializing in reality. And so you have the context of this predicted Biden landslide that did not materialize. The betting markets were wrong. All of the big pollsters in the consensus media were absolutely wrong. And then on top of that, you have other swing states that didn't do this delay, like, Florida and Ohio. Trump won these places, and he won Florida, I believe, by like a bigger margin than Obama.
I think in Florida and Ohio, he won by bigger margins.
Yeah.
In Texas, it was a slightly smaller margin, but it was a decisive margin.
He won Texas, he won Florida, he won Ohio, he won Iowa, right? He finishes the night with these gigantic leads, and then tomorrow you wake up and it's like, Trump just lost the Rust Belt. Like, okay, yeah. Okay. And so you have to sit there and you're like, oh, well, you're looking at the places and it's like, yeah, it's Milwaukee, it's Detroit, it's Philadelphia, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you see what's being set up here. And this is the general argument. And I find it really compelling. And, I mean, I guess it's kind of like tangentially related, but if you want to get into this argument of like, oh, well, this is like a regular course of American elections, it's like, okay, maybe it is. But the difference is that like people are not accepting this anymore. And this kind of gets into, we can get into this later, but this gets into the ultimate relevance of Trump. And part of his relevancy in American politics now is that, business as usual is kind of no longer accepted. And so even if you wanted to make the argument that like, oh, I saw one guy on Twitter that was like, oh, no, there's nothing. His argument was essentially like, if I can cynically paraphrase him, is like, there's nothing wrong with these Philadelphia numbers. They've always been this corrupt. They've always been this ridiculously one-sided. And then he cited like the 2012 election, I think, with Mitt Romney and Obama, and it was some equally egregious number that should suggest.
Yeah, it was 100% of a precinct.
Yeah. And remember, this is in America. We laugh at news stories where it's like, I remember in the mid 2000s, it was like Saddam Hussein held a vote, and it's like, oh, surprise, surprise, he got 99% of the vote in Iraq. And you have some of these, largely Black American precincts where they were turning out in those numbers for Obama. It was probably fraud then. Let's just admit that. And it's probably the same thing now. So this isn't some like, people call it baseless because they haven't found like some sort of, like a series of like clear smoking guns. But, this is a big process, and it's not like you're necessarily going to immediately find this kind of transparent, unmistakable act of like, some guy's hand in the cookie jar. But you don't need that because of, the kind of picture I just portrayed. There's a lot of things that are really suspicious about this. And it doesn't matter if this is the normal course of events, because things are a little bit different now, and people seem to have much less patience and much less tolerance for this level of kind of, like the American political class having some final say through incredibly shadowy activity,
Yeah, no, and I agree. And going to back to your point that they're going to run with the line if they actually start investigating and auditing these votes, they're going to be like, you're disenfranchising Black people. They were so empowered. And then they find that they're just relying on dead people. None of these people in the district voted. A lot of them, who claim they had voted under a different identity, they're like a felon that are not legally allowed to vote. They're going to see all of this come together. And we're supposed to just ignore that the media is saying this is a free and fair election, that nothing wrong happened here. Meanwhile, they had spent the last 4 years saying that 2016 was not a free and fair election because Russia was able to have a few memes on Facebook. And they have clearly said that the 2016 election was not legitimate, even though there was no voter fraud shown in Trump's favor. There was no voter hacking by Russia. There was nothing of that sort. It was a fair election. That they complained about certain information that got out there through WikiLeaks that somehow was now disinformation, which is their new term that they use for anything that they don't like. It's replacing fake news, which fake news was the popular term until Trump appropriated it. And now they just use disinformation to say that any information or news they don't like, that's in there, and it's probably promoted by Putin, and we can't trust it. As they're going on with the Hunter Biden, story, that they're just like, this is disinformation, even though the hard drive exists. There's no Russian actors involved. It's all, legitimate, and it's all Americans, and somehow there's something wrong here. But they have to go along with this, that they're going to browbeat everyone into saying we need to unite as a country. We're all Americans, and Biden can unite us. And he's giving off these stupid messages about how we need to come together and not see each other as enemies, as he's proposing all these legislation and task force that would eliminate online free speech, that would target dangerous extremists who are just normal people who continue to vote Trump. But we're all just supposed to come together and unite as a country when there's nothing to bring us together. There's nothing what are we coming together for? What values do we share with the Biden coalition? What shared ideas or agenda are we supposed to get behind if we're
absolutely nothing?
There's absolutely nothing. And he offers us nothing. And it's just this empty unity pledge that the media wants to browbeat us with and say you have to follow along, you have to accept the election, when these very same people didn't accept the last election and spent all their time and all their energy trying to delegitimize and undermine Trump's win. And now when there's much more solid questions on Biden's supposed victory, which is not a victory, Trump won, and we're just supposed to ignore it and accept what happened. And if you question it, they're going to say that you disenfranchise Black voters. And I know liberals are already celebrating this victory as a huge win, as there were several of these affluent white hovels throughout the country in Philadelphia, DC, Atlanta, where all these goofy whites just got out in the street and started dancing to Mariah Carey's "We Want Christmas This Year" and all these like stupid songs that they were wanting. And this is like their time. This is their victory. And they're so excited that the Trump, who they perceive as a tyrant, is gone. I don't know how they would handle if the audits and the investigations start going a different way. I mean, how do you see this turning out?
I mean, I think it would be totally unpredictable. Like, I think, I mean, the level, like, first of all, the context is really important here. I think that, like, everyone is lacking such perspective. And I've seen this on Twitter too. I would say that, like, there is so much resentment against Trump for the past few years from, in a way, all sides. It, like, parts of the right and the entire left. They have been so resentful over Trump that it's pretty much totally warped their perspective on things, like, completely and irrevocably, to the point where if you don't understand that the person you're listening to is almost entirely motivated by resentment over Trump, you can't really understand the arguments that they're making. And that sounds really extreme, but it's really it is genuinely true. And so, like, right now, the kind of contrived and premature celebratory, like, attitude regarding Trump's loss, it has to be understood in the context of, you know, you're talking about, like, this complacent population that is vocally preferring, and this even includes people on the right. This is really important. You're vocally supporting and preferring an establishment candidate who, by the way, who voted for the Iraq War, right? The pro-war and the anti-war candidates have now completely flipped, which no one noticed over the past 20 years, right? We have an Iraq war supporting candidate for president who is the Democrat, and the anti-war candidate is the Republican, who is this, like, clearly compromised and corrupt career politician. And people are happy over his purported victory because now that means they've defeated imaginary, unreal fascism.
That's
like,
right.
The insanity of, like, the reason I'm talking like this and I'm trying to articulate it like this, Scott, is because the insanity of this is not, it doesn't necessarily break down along a partisan line. Like, this is a collective insanity, and it's being driven by the media. And so, you know, in the most kind of simple terms, the media has made large portions of the population insane, even in a reactive way. You know, some of the MAGA people, you know, with the QAnon, they've kind of had, but it's important. I think it's very important. Let me say this, you know, regarding, like, QAnon and these other people like that, that their kind of, you know, silliness, if you want to call it that, is reactive. These are not people in power. These are not people who are responsible for the decisions that this country has made in domestic and foreign policy for the past, you know, 20, 30, 40 years. That has to be understood, because I see that a lot online, and it strikes me as very insular and very short-sighted. And like I said at the beginning of this, it totally lacks perspective. Losing sight of who the real culprits in American political life are has been, like, the number one problem that people have had regarding their political analysis. And you see that when people talk about, like, QAnon or, you know, the MAGA people out in the streets supporting Trump, that these are not elites. These are not people that have had any influence over our policy decisions. And so it's very important to understand that. And so, because all of this is being conditioned by the media, I don't actually know what will happen if somehow they have their media contrived hopes and beliefs completely dashed by a legitimate challenging of the system, the way it's been challenged previously. There's nothing really extra legal about this. There's nothing out of the ordinary about this. I feel like, you know, my gut wants to say that, oh, it'll be chaos. It'll be violence. It could be. I legitimately don't know. But just seeing this, it just strikes me as so dangerously irresponsible to convince, you know, mindless sheep out there that, you know, there's a kind of foregone conclusion about the way things are going to unfold after especially in the context of after 4 years of the media hyping up Trump as Hitler and the 2016 election as illegitimate. In other words, there's already been so much dangerous and unnecessary hysteria created among the upper classes and certain elements of the lower classes in America that a reversal like that strikes me as like a breaking point.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think the capacity for violence is much greater now. I mean, I said this last week on Nick Fuentes' stream, is that I expected when Trump won in 2016 there would be riots all over the place, but there weren't. I mean, there were large demonstrations, but the capacity for violence hadn't been really reached at that point. As we've seen all summer, the capacity for violence is definitely there for aggressive demonstrations. I mean, there were riots in every city. They burned down some entire cities. They definitely have the people out there who can organize violence, who can get the militants in the positions that they need, and they can, really do damage to an extent that they couldn't be able to in 2016. And there was already a sense that there was going to be worse violence, because on that night, last Tuesday, when it looked like Trump may win, there was these demonstrations in DC where people got hurt really bad. There were Proud Boys who were stabbed. There was one guy who was beaten badly with a baseball bat on camera. And this is type of violence that you didn't really see before. I mean, of course, there were some people assaulted and stuff, but the kind of just additional level of viciousness where they're going to use, actually deadly weapons in the nation's capital. And people are definitely getting more angry. If there begins to show where these courts are looking into this, there's investigations, there's ballots getting thrown out, we will see violence that will dwarf what we saw in this last summer over George Floyd. And I don't know and I almost think this will impact the court's decision, is that John Roberts will sit there and he has a decision. He can choose whether Donald Trump or Joe Biden is to be president. And he realizes that if he selects Donald Trump, there's going to be mass violence. He may even be assassinated. Like, that is not like that wild to think that like some of these Supreme Court justices could have violence occur to them depending on their decision, especially if it goes against the left. And he'll sit there and he'll say, for the good of the country, I'm going to go with Joe Biden. Now, whether that will actually work for him, or whether there will be enough justices to override John Roberts' decision, that remains to be seen. But that potential problem for Trump exists, and I mean, they can definitely make themselves ungovernable. And every revolution occurs as you'll always read in textbooks, it occurs in an era of rising expectations. And the real violence comes out when those expectations are dashed or there's a minor setback. And it's always seen it, if you look at France, Russia, America, this is what happened in their respective revolutions. So I'm not necessarily there will be a revolution here. I don't think we have the capacity for that. And depending on where the institutions stand, I think there could be a chance where this is like overthrown, but then the institutions just say, it's just too violent out there and we're worried about getting murdered by leftists. So we're just going to, Trump, you have to leave office. We don't care what the results say. Here, the military, the generals send in the troops, they cart off Trump, and they just do this for the good of the country when it's, in fact, handing over our country to left-wing mobs and corrupt urban machines and telling white America that it's over. This isn't your country. You're dispossessed. Institutions will side with Antifa against you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it could, which is not true. There will always be something to do. That there is always hope, and we win in the end. So I just want to emphasize that point. I think the other thing is that if Biden somehow managed to succeed in his theft, is that there could be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that there's all these prominent leftists, I think Robert Reich and a couple of other people, several journalists have made a point about this, about how Trump supporters need to be punished. There's already a Trump accountability project that any person who has been associated with Trump, they're trying to blacklist them and ensure that they're never employed again. Do you really see that there could be a government-sponsored initiative to punish Trump, his family, and his supporters in the wake of the election?
I don't know if it would be like an actual, institution or, bureaucratic governing body setup. I wouldn't go that far to predict that, but I'll say that it's very important to realize that, like, yeah, they want a kind of parallel to, like denazification. They want to treat they are salivating to be able to treat Trump as this kind of irrational, unpredictable bout of irregularity in the American system, the American history, basically. And that it's like this little blip on the meter. And we dealt with it, and now things are back to quote unquote normal, which is, of course, for people who aren't like completely ideologized, American normal is horrifying decline and immiseration over time. And that's what they want. They want to be able to treat Trump as essentially a dictator who basically like tricked his way into power for 4 years. But, the heroic and competent and totally not senile Joe Biden was able to, take him out, just like, Grandpappy did in World War II against the other fascists and Nazis. And
That's
so
right.
they were like part of that, definitely, again, I don't know if it's institutionalized or anything like that, but yeah, part of that definitely would involve, like interrogating people to see it, like, were you a Trump supporter? Did you support Trump during like the dark years? Where were you?
Are you an incel?
Yeah,
Are you?
One of our good friends on Twitter, he had a funny tweet 2 weeks ago. I think it was 2 weeks ago. It was about like a MAGA version of apt pupil, where
yeah.
he finds a MAGA hat in the old man's chest or whatever, and
Yeah, for listeners who don't know what Apt People is, it's this strange 1990s movie where some kid finds out his neighbor was like in the SS, and the elderly SS officer like trains him to be his like protege, and he's like dressing up in uniforms. It's a very strange movie. I don't recommend it, but it's
I could just picture some 12-year-old learning how to count black unemployment statistics. Some MAGA boomer.
Black unemployment statistics, teaching him how to be the least racist person he knows.
And then, my son, you call them racist. You call them racist. The real racist.
They are fake news. And then he turns on, he's like, here, you will know the ancient power. And he turns on Macho Man. Stereo. It's like the wisdom will come through you.
Instead of goose stepping in his house in place, he does the little Trump YMCA dance.
Moves, yeah.
He puts his fist out left to right, left to right.
Yeah, I think that could happen, but on the point that a government-sponsored initiative, I don't see it happening because this election did go their way. I mean, there's still a chance Democrats may lose the House. It's not likely, but they're losing a significant number of seats. They're not going to gain the Senate, even though the special election in Georgia is still out. It looks pretty favorable to Republicans. I think they'll pull it off, and so they won't have the Senate. They're not going to have the House, so they can't really go through with it. And Biden should be such a weak president. He's going to be focused on other things. But it will be a private initiative among some of these, prominent media outlets, prominent corporations. That Trump Accountability Project could be expanded, and that could be a shared list to all corporations. That if you took, if you were a volunteer on the Trump campaign, that could impact you. That's if he wins, but of course, we know he won't unless GOP and the Supreme Court allow the steal. So that's pretty much the left's reaction to it. The right had some interesting reactions to it. I mean, pretty much entire Trump base, boomers, nationalists, most of the dissident right are all behind him. They all believe this is rigged. This is a stolen election. They're not ready to give up. But there are a lot of sides who are ready to give up, or some sides who are giddy that Trump lost, and are more focused on their petty concerns. So we'll first go from least relevant to most relevant in the political sphere in this discussion. First up is the all-powerful remnants of the alt-right, calling themselves 5%ers. 5% refers to the apparent drop in white men who supported Trump this year versus in 2016. These white men likely voted against Trump because they thought he was a mean racist, and most of them are affluent whites living in suburbs and other places. They're not necessarily the white working class in the alt-right's imagination. But the 5%ers believe these alienated men are actually white nationalists who voted against Trump because he didn't nuke Israel. The same group believes everything MSNBC tells them and insists there is no voter fraud, all while insisting the Holocaust never happened. They are also giddy about the dispossession of white Americans in spite of claiming to represent them. Apparently, white boomers are the real enemy. So, Nightmare, did you ever think the alt-right would end up this pathetic, compared to what it was like in 4 years ago?
Wait, hold on. Scott, are you trying to tell me, Scott Greer, are you trying to tell me that this isn't all this historic Trump loss isn't due to Wolfsbeard Odinson's followers deciding to stay home?
They're claiming that. The funny thing is they're trying to claim that they were instrumental in getting people to stay home. But if you look at what they were last arguing over for the last month, is that I'll sometimes see these tweets, and they've been in these internecine feuds all year. I mean, there was sometime they spent all 3 months complaining about racist liberals and others who didn't hate Israel enough. And the month leading up to it, they're having some dispute over something called Apolloism, which I'm still not sure what that is, but it, inspired them to start doxing each other and, issuing violent threats against each other, because this is the real sign of a healthy, strong movement that's able to enjoy the loyalty of 5% of white America. But so they weren't involved. There was no groundwork activism convincing people to stay home or to vote for Biden. If you looked at any of their messaging, the public messages on Twitter or anywhere else, is all involved in these, feuds that no outsider could ever discern what the hell they're talking about.
Counter signaling Apollo, Scott. So the pagan oaks, that's fine, but the pagan cypress trees, that's too much. Okay,
yeah, that is too much. But I still don't even know what it is. But they're very hot and bothered by it. They're very mad about it, and so this is what they're talking about. So maybe I would understand if they were there was a coordinated groundwork, actual ground activism to get there, but there isn't, and they're not really offering what's the alternative to Trump. I mean, they always say we can never vote for Republicans, and I don't know if that's your position, but I don't know what's the and no one's saying that we're voting is the B end of all
end all
solutions.
be all.
This is it. This is the only thing. We're going to vote our way out. I don't think anyone ever argues that.
No, it's always gross caricatures. That's all it is. I mean, we don't have to get into the weeds on this. I'm sure that you see the same things I do. This is, just for people, if you're still kind of interacting with this, it's one of the more sadder parts of the internet. And if a lot of these arguments that are being made, if they seem a little bit incomprehensible to you, to anyone listening who's paying attention to them, it's because you have to know that they're being motivated by sheer petty resentment. People that are just flatly contradicting themselves one week versus the next week. People that are saying things that just strike you as totally unintuitive and totally unreasonable, but they're being made with supposed level of earnestness that kind of comes off as sincere. If this all strikes you as weird, it's because it is. Because believe it or not, there's people that are, they have the pretense of being these kind of, shrewd analysts and cultural commentators, but they really, truly just get up in the, they truly get up in the morning thinking what can I say to own, Nick Fuentes or Scott Greer or something like that. And without understanding that is driving this mentality of this kind of, just tiny clique of people, really. It's not really relevant.
It
You're
really
right.
is 5 people. It's
Yeah.
the 5%er. It's like more like 5 people. I mean, but they still have a voice on Twitter, and most of the people on right-wing Twitter are hating on them. If you look at all their big tweets, they're all getting ratioed. Most of them are losing followers, so it is not necessarily catching a message, but they are trying to compete and put out this message that we stand with the 5% of people who are most likely libtards, who are care about like all these things that they are supposed to not care about. I mean, they're like, we don't like Trump because he's a racist, or that he deported all these immigrants and he put immigrants in cages. Meanwhile, they think this 5% is rejecting Trump because he wasn't a fascist. He wasn't actually a fascist. That the 5% wanted him, and they imagine that there's all these working class whites who are out there sitting there who still remember the Syria strikes. Like, of course, I thought the Syria strikes were stupid, but no one really remembers them. And at the end of the day, you just hit an empty airfield. And compared to the entire political establishment, Trump is the only one trying to pull our troops home. Like, there's no one in the political establishment who's done more to try to withdraw our presence from the Middle East than Trump. And yes, some of his decisions in foreign policy have been stupid and have been opposed, but I don't think any single person, or maybe 2 people at most, who subscribe to these insane ideas, and they certainly didn't impact the election. I don't think any person voted based on the Syria strikes or thinking that Trump is a neoconservative. I mean, I think actually some of these 5%ers were upset that Trump didn't intervene more in the Middle East, that he didn't, they believe the lies that Trump is doing nothing about the Russian bounties against our troops in Afghanistan. And they believe that we need to use American military power to take out Assad. They're not people who are, replaying the Assad song on their car speakers or anything.
The argument, Scott, for the problem with the argument from so many POC, that's people of Charlottesville, for people to understand the lingo. The argument from so many POC is, the argument that Trump has been disappointing, I think, is uncontroversial amongst almost everybody. But to take that and turn it into an argument that Trump is like positively harmful, and his like burgeoning popularity and his electoral success, his presidency are actively harmful to the extent that we ought to prefer the establishment. Like
Biden, like they're openly, some of them are openly claiming like Biden will do more about immigration. I was like, and wars, and like Biden is definitely going to get us involved in more foreign interventions. Like there is a 95% chance we up our military presence in Syria to take out Assad. He's going to strip immigration enforcement. He's going to, we're going to effectively have open borders. He's going to try to push through an amnesty. It probably won't succeed, but he'll do stuff through executive action to effectively have amnesty. And so there's nothing good that will happen. And even some of them are like, he's going to send in the military to really crack down on BLM Antifa. I was like, no, he won't. I mean, Obama never did anything like that. I think there will be less support among the average liberal probably for that violence, but they're not going to do anything. I mean, Democrats controlled Oregon. They did nothing about the violence.
Black Lives Matter existed before Trump, which apparently everyone except for like us has completely forgotten. Black Lives Matter is older than Trump's political career. And aside from the resentment, which again is like the hugely driving factor here, the other thing is, just like with a lot of liberals, there's a lack of perspective. Like in the same way that, we're not supposed to question this election, even though the legitimacy of the 2016 election was brought into question literally by every corporate media outlet for the past 4 years. We're supposed to pretend that didn't happen. Regarding this topic, we are supposed to just take Trump for granted, and we're supposed to now view him as the enemy and as an obstacle to some other goal that we truly want, as if Trump's victory and his campaign being successful 4 years ago was itself just like a matter-of-fact foregone conclusion. We're all just supposed to forget that we were supposed to be subjected to Hillary Clinton versus Jeb Bush and their respective clones subsequent for like the rest of American history. Like that's the table that was set for the American citizen, the American voter. And so to lose perspective over how unforeseen, how unlooked for Trump's political career is, just a short 4 years ago, it's not really that long, is again, it's a huge lack of perspective. And as disappointed, I know you've been disappointed over Trump. I know I've been disappointed over Trump in serious ways, not even just like kind of trifling, irrelevant ways. I have a lot of hopes. I had a lot of hopes that were dashed myself. But to argue that, let me put it this way. There's nothing Trump can do that would ever make him worse than the establishment that I rejected in 2016. I will never go back to that. Like, the idea that Trump is insufficient, if you want to argue that, fine. But there is no scenario where someone like Joe Biden, who to me is just, it's all George Bush, Mitt Romney, John Kerry, Hillary Clinton, they're all John McCain, they're all the same person, right? There's no argument that I will ever find compelling again that would make me consider any of those people, any of them. And Trump's disappointment has zero impact on that. Zero.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not offering anything. And when they're like, don't vote GOP, don't do this. And like, you have to just be incredibly negative on Twitter and attack people and then get in these Byzantine ideological disputes with people you share 99 or like, they're not even just arguing with me. They're arguing with like people that they have share like everything in common, but there's like some very minor disagreement about like a historical event, and they'll like go to have a month-long flame war over it. And so it's not like a really healthy movement. And then anytime you like ask these people, it's like, well, we have to build our own institutions. Like, are you building those institutions? Where are they? What are they supposed to accomplish? What is the goal here of like accomplishing? How are you supposedly raising white racial consciousness by going against the one person who is a representative of white America, who millions and millions of white Americans who are open to our ideas, who are coming more to our position of the dissident right? Where are you? How are you attracting these people? Or is there some other constituency out there that shares your opinions? And there's no constituency outside of their narrow ghetto, like for this. Like they're just talking to themselves, and this makes them feel very good. It's very much the misfit kids table mentality that they sit around, they imagine that they're very powerful and very important, and they just spend all their time ankle biting and being the peanut gallery, and it's leading them to relish in this idea that millions of white Americans had their votes overturned by corrupt black-run urban machines, along with the liberal elites in the deep state. And somehow this is a good thing because it sends a message to the GOP that I don't know, they need to be more anti-Israel, which is not the message that's getting received by anyone. And they're going to continue to go on with this. But, it's ultimately they're coming, as we've seen in a lot of the cases this year, they've always been on the side against what would be the historic American people, or what they're thinking, or middle Americans' opinions. Like they were for permanent lockdown, like forced lockdown, sending troops to people's home and making sure that they don't open their business and don't step foot out of their home. They supported that. When the George Floyd protests originally emerged, they believed the media's story about George Floyd and were anti-police, and some of them were even celebrating the riots. And now with the election, which the election is going to stand for a long time as an important event to the right, and where you stood on that will be a test for future candidates. And they're standing against the people who are more likely to agree with nationalism or support nationalism. And, there's just not, there's no constituency.
But this does really.
I mean, it's like there's no secret constituency of MSNBC watchers who really want someone to tell them that who are also Holocaust deniers and are upset and drinking wine because Trump isn't racist enough.
Scott, I may deny the Holocaust, but at least I'm not rude.
Yeah. It's like there's no way that the platform is ever going to be elevated. The alt-right was a big thing. It became a viable vital, had a lot of vitality to it in 2016 because it's something new. It's like, there was this public perception of what like remained outside of the right. And, they really wanted to make a conscious decision not to be like the old white nationalism, or white nationalism 1.0, as they always used to say. They're like, we're going to present ourselves as something new, that they're like, people are not going to come and see us and they're going to see, wow, these guys are a bunch of crazy neo-Nazis who don't represent my interests. And they made the argument that Republicans are not representing your interests. They're focused on tax cuts and regulations and more foreign wars instead of focusing on immigration and trade protection, and they are not representing you. And this captured a lot of people's imaginations, and this what helped Trump win the 2016 primary. These were very powerful ideas, and there was no one really articulating this, especially not within conservative media, especially not within the mainstream media. So a lot of people gravitated towards this position. It was very positive and was wanting to represent these people. And now the position is that we need to demand that these people care about a lot of issues that the ordinary American doesn't care about. And, appealing to this fantasy left that doesn't exist, and these fantasy high IQ liberals who are just waiting to become white nationalists for some reason. And this is what's going to be the path to power, which, the path to power for them has already been sealed. I mean, the public perception of them is already determined in 2017 through their own mistakes. It has nothing to do with Trump. I mean, they like to blame Trump for all their mistakes and the fact the alt-right didn't rise, when it's in fact their own decisions and their own events that they decided to host, and that those things occurred. Yeah, and now they, so there is now all they're left with is resentment towards anyone who's wanting to do something different. And there's not really much future for it. So even in a Biden era, I mean, a lot of these guys are going to be most impacted by Biden tech censorship policies, and potentially, what policies he may set for DHS and the FBI. So I don't know what they're winning here, and it's not really acceleration, and they're not really accelerating, the average white American's racial consciousness by laughing at them and enjoying the fact that they lost an election. I don't think those people are going to want to hear what else they have to say.
No, but Scott, this is important because this does dovetail with a much more popular liberalism that exists in America, with millions of Democrats just voted for Joe Biden. And there is a parallel here that's really important, and that's you constantly hear this, that, oh well, you're just trying to own the libs. All you want to do is own the libs. It's such a plebeian concern. Oh, you're so dumb, you just want to own the libs. But the truth is that a lot of American politics, and you can tell from this distinct group that you've just been talking about, and also most Democrats now, that the real driving force in American politics is not owning the libs. It's owning the conservatives. It's about owning the cons.
Well, owning white people. That's actually that's the entire left's motivation. I mean, they love the fact that whites are upset. Dave Chappelle gave this horrible rant on SNL last weekend, relishing the idea that white people got locked up for COVID, and that's why we had no mass shootings. And the whole crowd, went crazy. They were clapping. They're like, yes, attack white people. Please attack white people. And of course, most of these people are white. So the shared consensus in entertainment and left-wing politics is how we can own white people. And in academia is how they teach everything is white privilege and white supremacy. And, and a lot of people gravitate towards our ideas on the basis that they don't like these people laughing. They don't like the people who are pointing out and trying to stick a finger in their face and tell them what to do. And they gravitate towards this is like, well, I hate these people, and these guys are, countering what they're saying, and I'm going to listen to what they have to say. So, and owning the libs is much better than what conservatives were doing previous to Trump. Like, what do you want? Like owning the taxes, like owning the regulations, owning the Iraqis. Like, okay, yeah, owning the libs is much better. Like, these people suck. Like, and generally the policies and positions you're going to advocate for are going to be better. And if you enjoy the fact that they're upset by this, you're going to take more radical positions than what the previous GOP would be willing to take.
Yeah, and even politically, this is like, I feel like, you just approached it very, very culturally, which I think is all true. But even politically, this is true. So you have people on the far right that their desire is, oh, I just want to own these kind of bourgeois down or whatever, like or downwardly mobile, like white conservative Republican voters, right? By supporting Joe Biden, who is not going to reverse time back to 2014. He's going to accelerate things like media censorship. He's going to accelerate this kind of, globalist policies that the kind of far right only got traction in America in 2015, 2016 by being the most vocal opponents of. So the whole joke behind, owning the libs is that you're doing something, like the humor behind that joke of, oh, he's just trying to own the libs, is that you're doing something that hurts yourself, but you're doing it just to get one over on your enemies. And that full definition is what's applying here. So when I say that the real kind of driving motivator here is owning the cons, owning the conservatives, owning the whites, it's that they're hurting themselves. So you have people on the far right who support Joe Biden. That's patently insane, but they want to own the conservatives. And that's much less relevant. But getting into what's much more relevant is that the left, quote unquote, because again, that really doesn't exist in America. Like that is all that force in politics is also being driven by that. And this is the reason why people don't say that is because their lack of perspective. But let me just put it as clear as I see it, right? The Republicans in 2015, 2016, right? The primary voters, they put their money where their mouth was, right? Like everyone in politics on Twitter, on their internet forums in 2012 and the early 2010s, they were always complaining about bipartisanship in America. The Democrats are the problem, the Republicans are the problem. We need to do something different. Republicans nominated a guy that wouldn't even denounce universal health care at the debate. Do you remember that, Scott? Where like you had Rubio and Cruz, all like 16 other people. They all gave the little Heritage Foundation spiel about free markets and stuff. And then you got to Trump, and he didn't say any of that shit. And he won the
Republican and conservative opponents like, this ends him. He can't say that. Exactly. This is socialism. And of course, his poll numbers went up. Yeah, I remember that.
His poll numbers went up. He won the nomination. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to say is Republican voters proved that they were willing to buck the bipartisan consensus that's been ruling over us since the end of the Cold War. It wasn't the left, it wasn't the liberals, it was those very voters that everyone's trying to own and trying to make fun of. It was them who demonstrated at a national level that they were willing to take a chance on someone new. Bernie's a loser. He was never going to win. He never had a shot. He's one of the most pathetic people on the national stage ever to exist. Both times he was like excruciatingly humiliated by his own party. And the people that supported him are now basically almost nakedly exposed as people who were grifting to funnel you into Democrat politics. And you see that, it's just like the jig is up, so to speak, right? And so this is the kind of perspective that you need. You have all of their supporters in this country. The way politics has gone is that we are not going to give tacit support to the most like quote unquote like liberal economic person, Donald Trump, in years to win the Republican ticket, right? Someone he's not a free trader. He's not going to condemn something like universal health care, right? He's basically bridging the gap over, all of these issues that everyone's been talking about for a very long time. But it's because of the people that voted for him, because they were, in large part downwardly mobile whites, people who were Christian, and because he was anti-immigration, everyone decided to throw that out. They threw out the opportunity to create something new through Trump, maybe with Bernie, maybe with other Democrats, you understand, like to create something that everyone has been saying they wanted for so long, something different. They threw it out to own the conservatives. They threw it out. They threw out the opportunity, and they just voted for, like I said earlier, a guy who voted for the Iraq war. Like, I feel like when I say that, it's almost like an inessential, non-compelling point. But like, do you remember it was like a little over 10 years ago that like your opinion on the Iraq war was like the sole determining factor on where you fell politically. And it has completely 180'd now. And it's like, we're not supposed to even notice this. So you have somebody in Trump in his campaign who was willing to kind of create something new, or at least he gave people on even the left an opportunity to create something new, to support something new. And they didn't do it because he's a Nazi, he's a fascist, he's a white supremacist, blah, blah, blah. It's about owning the cons. That's what it's always been about. And it's true in both the cases that we're just talking about, but it's much more prominent now. You had people on the left, with liberal Democrats, they supported Joe Biden, who even by, 15 years ago would be considered like an unacceptable candidate for his support for the Iraq war. And they just feigned enthusiasm for this guy just to try to get back at the people who supported Trump. It's just like unbelievably disgusting.
So there's this Coping Maga account where all these forces come together. It's run by three, I believe all three are transsexual, and all three are leftists, and they have terrible content. All of them have like hammer and sickles in their bio. And this account is retweeted by Never Trumpers, crappy centrist liberals who have like the globe in their handles, Wignats, and Chapo leftists. So all these groups come together just to share horrible content about how like, oh, these guys are coping. They're coping. And it's like, well, you're coping by voting for the establishment. Unless it's the actual centrist libs, you get what you want. And maybe some of the Never Trumpers, but Wignats and people who are listening to Chapo Trap House are getting the complete opposite of what they want. But they're trying to pretend that this is actually something that that this is a win for them. Now, some of the leftists, I think, are cognizant of the fact that this isn't a win for them. Chapo Trap House has been pretty depressed about the election. They haven't been that enthusiastic about it. They do realize this is a defeat for them. I do wonder what the future is for DSA types in the next 4 years. I mean, if Biden manages to secure this deal, this is a big win for centrists, especially with all these centrists claiming that they got hurt in the election by defund the police and being too aggressive with Black Lives Matter. That message may resonate throughout the party, and there's not really a good successor to Bernie Sanders that these people really like. I mean, they do have AOC and others, but they are much more woke and much more appealing to these liberals that they hate. So there's not somebody who they really want, like a Corbyn or Bernie Sanders figure, and they don't really have that figure who can succeed Bernie. And now I
have no sympathy for this. If you ever,
well, I don't either. But it's
unironically call Trump a fascist or anything like that, as far as I'm concerned, you're just a Democrat operative. I don't care what these people have to say for themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just interesting to note how there's no future for them. I don't really know and even with their content, they're just desperately grasping to, MAGA, the maggots are coping right now. And it's like, Bernie Sanders suffered a far more humiliating defeat in the Democratic primary. There was far more cope then, and it completely obliterated your movement. And now you're going to have a successor like AOC, who's fully in line with the neoliberal establishment. And that's your future. There's a much more optimistic future for the nationalist right. And all you can do is just share these horrible memes made by three transsexual 18-year-old leftists. And you're like, this is awesome. And that's how you elevate yourself. And so it's the same with like Wignats. I guess they're finally having the right left alliance. But actually, all these accounts are making fun of them for retweeting them. So we'll have to see. I mean,
but here, really quickly, Scott, what's funny about this, again, the perspective that everyone's lacking. If you're like, if you consider yourself like a bona fide leftist and you're laughing at all this stuff, just remember what happened to Bernie in the Iowa caucus in the Democrat primary, right? Pete Buttigieg was like, well, the results aren't all in, but it looks like we won, guys. Pack it in. Break out the champagne. Like, you just
now Democratic corruption immediately disappears when it comes to
you were literally, if you're a Bernie supporter out there, you need to know that you were a trial run for last week. That's literally the only purpose that you serve in Democrat politics, was to give young, gay, neoliberal, probably future demigod Pete Buttigieg a chance to do the exact same thing that just happened, which is basically just pretend that he won an election. And that's exactly what happened to Bernie Sanders. So again, it's about owning the cons, because this is so humiliating that I have to point this out, that essentially they pulled like election fraud during the Democrat primary. It's so humiliating that you have to point this out to people that are supposedly like giddy that, oh yeah, the MAGA tards got owned. And it's like, this literally happened to your candidate 2 times in a row.
Yeah, he got rolled up. And it's the same with the Wignats too, is that they get rolled up and destroyed anytime they try to attempt something. And then they demand that everyone get mad about it and whine, and that they're like, this is an injustice and we must unite. And like, we have to stop this injustice against us, but they have no power or allies to help them in their mission. So all they can really rely on is resentment towards anyone else.
Pat Little wouldn't have lost. Pat Little would have won. Here's how Pat Little can still win.
I don't know if they even like him. The problem is they don't like each other, so there's not a figure that they can unite around. It's like they hate each other. It's like, no, I hate that person. So I don't know even unite around Patrick Little. But enough on that. There's a group that's far more mainstream that's trying to steal nationalist thunder. They call themselves the post-liberals. I've talked about them in previous podcasts. And a better term might be the kosher nationalists, is that they're also, trying to have their own spin on the election. Most of them are, well, because they have to be politically relevant, have to say, oh, there's some irregularities with Trump, and yeah, we supported Trump. But, the reason why he lost is because he, didn't have this fully economic populist policy that I articulate. Where was the industrial policy that they always say? Now, there is some, credibility to this argument. I think if Trump had gotten through his COVID relief bill right before the election, which Democrats made sure didn't happen because they know it would have helped Trump, and Republicans didn't do it because they're stupid and tied to these stupid libertarian policies that they will just insist on no matter the situation. I think if he had gotten that through, he probably would have won even with the electoral fraud. But the real, as I emphasized earlier in the podcast, is that the real reason Trump may not win, quote unquote, is because of the corrupt urban machines. It's not because of, you can, and you're quibbling right now at a time when this is not the time to quibble. Like, you could be like, well, he could have done this, he could have done that. Why didn't he have my special little policy? It's like, I was right. I called that he wouldn't win these states. It's like, no, the point is to unite around him, because he is the symbol of white America, and him losing is a sign of dispossession for the historic American nation. And that's it. Like, worrying about these minor things is not it. And he won with what he was doing. It was just, what should he have done? Like, he should have built his own city and had his own corrupt urban machine. That's the real argument you're making here.
I mean, I agree with that. Just for argument's sake, just for the record, he should do that. He should start doing.
Well,
that.
Yeah, he should do that. But I don't like the point where it's like quibbling. And a lot of these people are definitely trying to build up something that's, moving past Trump. And, a lot of people want to make this argument is like, you eventually have to move past Trump. I mean, that is true. But what are you moving on from him to? Are you moving on to Josh Hawley, who, of course, doesn't understand identity issues? And after George Floyd's death, got very emotional on the Senate floor about systemic racism and police brutality towards innocent Black people. Is that your replacement for Trump? They don't really understand. Like, what they want to move on to is this decent and respectable nationalism that no one really will gravitate towards. Is that Trump's divisiveness and his cultural war fights that he always waged, that he always got himself involved in, is what tied him so strongly to middle America. And taking that away, taking his combativeness away, and his vulgarity and his attacks on the media and owning the libs, you end up with something boring that doesn't motivate middle Americans to go out in the cold and sit, listen for 2 hours to a Trump speech. You're not going to grab those type of crowds with
Scott,
a Josh Hawley.
Scott, I could see it now. 60,000 people waiting out in the cold, the hail, hours online just to hear an out loud public reading of Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh, yeah, J.D. Vance, man, they're waiting for it. J.D. Vance comes up. He first off apologizes for the media because they called him racist again. And then he just spends his whole time talking about how he's married to an Indian and his kid has an Indian name. And let's see them call him racist now. And then he just gets, and then they're like, woo, we're so excited for this. We want to apologize. We have Indian kids too. And that's like going to really excite them. And
get Roger
they really don't
here.
Understand that some of it, Trump's appeal was policies, but it was identity issues that was related to white Americans viewing this as a country that they didn't grow up in, and that there's something rapidly different, and they know that there's going to be less of a place for them in the future America. Those are the primary issues that he gravitated towards, versus these people who think that it was, people who are like small business owners getting really excited about like union reform policy or something, or like these making unions stronger. And then like a lot of these people are not in unions who are voted for Trump. They're not particularly motivated by industrial policy. They like trade protectionism and they like his non-interventionism, but identity issues were at the core of it. And Trump's combative side, his ability to present himself as a strong man, were incredibly important to his appeal. And to take that away, you end up with, a boring lecture from J.D. Vance or Orrin Cass, or these like dorks who, have no ability to motivate a crowd and fire up that base.
Well, and additionally, I actually don't, this might sound slightly blackpilling indirectly. It's not really though, but I actually don't know.
We don't allow that. So you're going to have to change that real quick.
I genuinely actually don't know the extent to which this can exist apart from Trump. And I don't really know what I'm saying there. So take that for what it's worth.
I understand what
I don't actually, I don't know if he should, if he does win re-election. Scott, I'm not 100% sure that he should, quote unquote, exit politics when his technical.
Oh, he shouldn't at all. Even if even if the steal is secured, he should continue on to politics and potentially run for president.
I know he jokes about 8 more years or 12 more years, but have you seen those crowds? I'm not sure that should be totally, tongue in cheek.
He needs to keep hosting rallies no matter what happens. If he wins, he needs to host rallies. If Biden steals this, he needs to host rallies, and that's just it. He can build a movement that actually reshapes the GOP, and that should be his mission, no matter the results.
Well, what I was going to say is that additionally, on top of the things you just said about this kind of like alternative, this kind of like polite, economic nationalism.
The polite right.
Yeah, the polite right. One thing that they're all missing is that they're the indictment of the system, and that's what Trump represented. People do not just feel that they want a system that is totally reformed, or at this point almost revolutionized in terms of our foreign policy, domestic policy, trade policy, but they want the indictment. Like, this sounds, people say it's coping or you're delusional, it'll never happen, but this is not something to be ashamed of. The people want justice. People at Trump's rallies, they do not chant for tariffs, they chant to lock her up. And you can laugh at that and you can say that's
they
fashion.
booed Indigenous Peoples Day. That was like one of the best moments. He's like, we'll never change Columbus Day. They want to call it Indigenous Peoples Day. And they're like, boo! Like the whole crowd. And when Ilhan Omar, they're like, lock her up. Like there's this thing that like Josh Hawley would never do that. He would just give some boring policy wonky speech that everyone fall asleep to. And it's not exciting at all.
Or that kind of like insincere aspirational tone that like slimy politicians like to take, like, which is funny because Trump is supposed to be like the kind of slimy, insincere politician par excellence, and yet he actually comes off incredibly sincere.
Yeah, he's the most sincere politician we've had in a very long time. I mean, he goes up at his rallies and he just talks about what he wants. I mean, he talked about having COVID and like the doctors touching every part of his body. And it's like, why is this speech? But the people love that more than anything that a Josh Hawley character or a Marco Rubio, who's also trying to pivot to this polite right, post-liberal, kosher national populism. And like, they're not going to be into that. They want to be, Trump is a unique cultural figure. And, you know, he combined like this WWE mentality and aesthetic into American politics, and the middle America loved it. And you really have to enjoy this. And you could never see, there's a incredible Panther Den video where he put out with Trump stereo, where it leads up, it's like the Super Saiyan song, and it's like Trump just like, ah! And like, you could never imagine this type of creative content made for another politician.
Absolutely not.
What?
Oh, I said absolutely not. Yeah, no, it would never. It would never happen. Never in a million years.
Yeah, no, and that's in this content is just not going to be any, like, there are people who are ride or die for Trump. He has this quasi-religious following around him, and it's going to be hard to replace. I think there are some people who can take on it, like somewhat. Like, I think Tucker could have something similar, but it wouldn't be the same. And this is a huge problem with national populism. And they're also going to claim that, like, well, look at how Trump won over Hispanics. Like, it was due to industrial policy. And it's like, no, it's because Trump like presented himself as a strong man who owned libtards and like was not the pro Black Lives Matter candidate. Like, Hispanics gravitated towards him, not because they're natural conservatives or natural post-liberals, but because they're natural racists. Like, that's like the end of the story. It's like Biden presented himself as the candidate that you are going to worship blacks. Like, Black Lives Matter. I'm the Black Lives Matter candidate. I mean, of course, Trump also got involved in some of this stuff with his platinum plan, but he was the only one who's like, I don't support Black Lives Matter. I don't worship them to the same extent that Democrats do. And, you know, I stand up for law and order while Democrats don't. And not Democrats, but Hispanics gravitated towards that. And they like the idea of a strong man who appeals to their cultural sensibilities. And JD Vance is not going to.
I'm just picturing Larry Kudlow like telling people we need Hispanic immigration. They're natural fascists.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It makes sense. But there is a new coalition, right-wing coalition. And a lot of people always want a Blackpill that demographics is destiny. But as we're learning that Hispanics are now starting to join with the historic American nation because they see themselves as being left behind by the Great Democratic Coalition. They're not at the elites with Asian immigrants who fully assimilate to, you know, upper middle class white liberals. You know, they don't come interested in that. Hispanics are assimilating with working class and middle class whites who share conservative principles, and they also have to live around blacks, and they realize that like they need law and order, and they don't like Black Lives Matter, and they realize they are also uncomfortable with the idea that they have to build this whole cultural system around bending the knee for blacks and treating them like they're divine beings. And they're like, we live with them. Like, we know what they're like. No, we don't want to worship them.
Yeah, and there's a class aspect to this too. You have immigrants who come to the country wealthy. They like, you know, a lot of Asian immigrants and stuff, and they're the ones that predominantly they like immediately break Democrat, where there's almost like there's not even a potential to ever convert them because they essentially transmogrify into white liberals in like less than, you know, one generation.
Yeah, for Asian, that's a huge problem among Asians, is that the Asians who are most likely to support Republicans are the ones who can't speak English fluently and were born abroad. Like, if you're born here and can speak English fluently, you're more likely to support Democrats. With Hispanics, I think they are just assimilating into becoming, you know, for lack of a better term, they're assimilating into white America. And you know, their position is ambiguous, and they don't really subscribe to a universal Hispanic identity. And as we're witnessing with Trump, that, like, you know, he's kind of, you know, maybe they're going to be like the new Italians, at least 40% of them. I think there's a lot of Puerto Ricans are going to still stay with Democrats and still see themselves as a part of the great POC coalition. People of color, not people of Charlottesville, but maybe there was a few Puerto Ricans there. And so that's like what but it's being motivated by someone who's like Trump, who gets that these are appeals to identity issues, to appeals to the culture war, and trying to retain this coalition with either industrial policy or moving back to Tea Party 2.0, which a lot of the GOP establishment and these dopey conservatives want to move back to. It's not just going to work. And moving away from that topic, as the GOP establishment seems pretty happy with the results of Trump losing and them getting the Senate and having a slightly larger margin in the House, is that they want to return to normal, which there is no possibility to return to normal. Is that Trump will still be around, he'll still be hosting rallies, he'll still have the loyalty and the admiration of 94% of Republicans, and they're still going to have to deal with this, the Trumpian moment. And I think they're not going to be able to get away with moving to a Tea Party 2.0. Like, there's nobody care. Like, even the Democrats don't care about the issues that really upset the Tea Party. Like, they primarily want to focus on anti-white racism and Black Lives Matter indoctrination and, tearing down monuments. Like, this is stuff that the Tea Party didn't address. So there will be some new movement that maybe if Trump doesn't, beat back the steal, that there will be a kind of Tea Party 2.0, but it will not be motivated by the Tea Party's issues. It will be motivated by national populism. And everyone's going to have to acclimate to that. And the Republican nominee in 2024, whoever will have to have Trump's full support, or it could be Trump himself. We'll have to see. But I still think he's going to win. One interesting fact that I found is that all of Trump's major foreign policy allies have thrown him under the bus. Bibi Netanyahu has congratulated Joe Biden. Modi has congratulated Joe Biden and talked about how proud he is of Kamala Harris, an American, to be a vice president. Mohammed bin Salman is also congratulating Joe Biden. So all of his allies that Trump, spent a lot of time on, he had good relationship with, are now just, oh, well, bye, Trump. Well, it's like people you wouldn't suspect, like AMLO in Mexico. Bolsonaro you would expect. But there's a few other people that you wouldn't expect who are, refusing to congratulate Joe Biden. So it is interesting that all these allies that Trump made a huge priority of getting cozy towards are, just throwing it away.
One of the, I think, ironies that also needs to be said, again, I'm attributing all of this to just a profound lack of perspective that people have acquired or lost rather over the past 4 years. You heard from elements of the far right and the broad left that all of you are just like doing Mitch McConnell's bidding, right? Trump is just doing Mitch McConnell's bidding. He's the real master. He's running the Republican Party, right? He's able to drive the agenda with like healthcare reform and tax cuts, and all of this is just doing Mitch McConnell's bidding. People, the very people who have said that nonstop for years, even before Trump, they supported Joe Biden. Like, that Mitch McConnell's dream is to have him be the head of the Senate with Joe Biden as the president. It's just like, it's neoliberalism on steroids for these guys. And that I just find so, again, it's all about owning the cons. Like, the very people that damned you, saying that you were indirectly lending support to Mitch McConnell leading the Republican Senate, who really only cared about like tax cuts and austerity measures, you all just went out and vocally supported his ideal candidate for like this senile old man who's just going to act as like a kind of rubber stamp ally for whatever like the Republican agenda is, which is like just more austerity and stuff like that, Medicare, Social Security, all those issues. He's just been salivating at that. We all know he has. And then
and they got what they wanted. They got the tax cuts, they got the eliminated regulations, and they got the judges. So like, what more do they want? They got what they wanted out of Trump. Bye Trump is their mentality.
Yeah, exactly. And then regarding something like the Tea Party 2.0, I remember the Tea Party when it started, and it's very interesting because the Tea Party does represent a lot of the kind of anxiety. I know this has been like a buzzword amongst the media for a very long time. They always like to joke tongue in cheek about how like, oh yeah, people support Republicans because of economic anxiety, and it's supposed to be like a wink nod because, oh well, we all know it's really racism, and that's true in a way. It's both true and not true. Because I actually don't really grant the dichotomy. I don't actually give. I don't agree with the presupposed distinction between like culture and economics. I don't think those are actually two completely different things. But it was interesting to note in the original Tea Party in like 2008, 9, and 10 that there was this kind of economic message that was being peddled. Yet it felt the need, because it was this overwhelmingly white historic American population movement, that it still felt the need to kind of appeal to this American identity and to like an Americana in their like propaganda, their iconography, their pictures, their websites and stuff like that. And it only became this kind of pure economic message once it was co-opted, like everything else is, by the conservative movement, by the Republican Party. And so when people say they want a Tea Party 2.0, and I'm assuming most of the people saying that are just libertarians who kind of feel left out.
It's
no one cares.
libertarian.
Yeah, they don't know. They really don't know how wrong they are, because the Tea Party really didn't reach its culmination until Trump. And the kind of sublimation, or rather the subsuming of all of these kind of broad issues of identity like immigration and culture, having to fit all of these and subsume them within this like purely economic critique of like, Federal Reserve or something like that. This was
audit the Fed. Really, audit the vote is the new rallying cry.
This was always inadequate. This was always inadequate. And so Tea Party 2.0 is such a misnomer of a term, because there is no evolution of the Tea Party 1.0 into something else. The Tea Party 1.0 was itself this kind of bastardized America First style movement that just didn't have the language, and now we know most critically didn't have like the champion to like represent them, to like to manifest their real concerns, which again, it's not
now
just,
we do have the language and the champion,
and it's not just oh, it looks like you didn't care about economics, you were just all racist. It's that no, these issues aren't neatly disentangled from one another. Immigration has to do with economics, and even look right now, just, I don't want to go into this or whatever, but even stuff like the race concerns of the Democrats, like even people on the left are realizing now, they're kind of coming to their senses that the Democrat, not all of them, just, like one or two people I follow on Twitter, basically. That's it.
The anti-woke left, you're running with, you should have listened to my podcast on the anti-woke left. You're falling for the meme, Red Nightmare.
Exactly. They're like, it's pretty transparently clear now that the Democrat Party is really like almost, they're running like the Republican economic playbook and using their inflammatory race and gender politics to conceal it, essentially, which is what makes Biden and McConnell so alluring and appealing to the establishment, because you essentially have like, the two halves of the amulet, like damning cuts to like Social Security and Medicare combined with like a dying old white man who will give you like the Black Power fist during his like State of the Union address. Like you literally won't be able to criticize Mitch McConnell cutting benefits because he'll call you racist. Like it's like the dream,
great dynamic we have. No, that's what's going on now. But I think there won't be a return to the Tea Party 2.0. We're gonna see the Trump movement continue on.
Scott, can I ask you real quick? Do you have Trump supporters in your family? Like friends, family, neighborhood?
I don't have a family. As Blep Sama exposed, I'm a Serbian war criminal who had to remake my life in America. So
when you go home to
my whole
Serbia,
family were killed by Bosniak partisans.
Okay. Okay, well, I'm sorry if you're
But
lost, but
in the fake family I have here that I use as my cover story, yes, I have Trump supporters.
okay, so you should know then. I mean, again, I know this sounds indirectly. I don't mean to sound blackpilling to have so much invested in Trump. I actually don't consider that to be a black pill because, again, I hope he just takes over the government and never leaves or whatever for the rest of his life. I don't care. But you see that like no one is really loyal to the Republican Party anymore. Trump's rallies now are bigger than they were in 2016. And I know I was joking before about staying out in the rain for hours to listen to like, some boring conservative talk, but people are actually doing that for Trump. And especially leading up to the election when he was campaigning nonstop. Like I saw a few of these rallies because I kind of stopped watching them as his presidency went on, of course. But I started watching them again, and I had to say it was quite striking. This guy has an army of people, and they're not loyal to the R. If Trump decided to run as a Democrat tomorrow, I don't think any of his supporters would give a shit. They would all just vote for him anyway.
Yeah, the fact that people volunteer their own time to do these truck convoys to surround like the Biden-Harris bus was just like incredible. And they would just like go in, and there was like hundreds and hundreds of these truck convoys throughout the country. And so, yes, he does have an army. And the GOP has to realize is that he could end the GOP, Mitch McConnell, if he says, the GOP Senate is not supporting me, so I tell my followers to not show up in Georgia for their runoff election. He would end Mitch McConnell with that, with just one tweet. And they realize this power, and he's going to continue to have this power for the next 4 years, whether he is in the Oval Office or not. But he should be in the Oval Office.
Again, I'm not making any predictions, of course, but this follows a historical trend going back, very far in history of the kind of singular ruler who has the aristocracy wanting him dead, and his only pool of support is the people. And that a lot of times is a recipe for, like, how would I put it? Unforeseen centralization. And I won't like, I won't spell that out or anything like that, but I'm just saying that it's not totally unusual, and it's certainly a mark of decline and corruption, and that's where we are right now, essentially.
Yeah, no, I agree. And moving on to our final topic before I take a patron question. This is about Joe Biden. Joe Biden throughout the campaign, really mostly journalists, had tried to emphasize that he's a devout Catholic, and this really animates his beliefs and how he shapes his politics. But as we all know, that somebody who is fervently pro-abortion and pro-gay marriage, and I'm not really sure what Catholic positions he holds, there's some questions there, and there's been quite a number of bishops and priests who've said that they will deny communion to Biden. But anyway, he really tried to hit this home in his supposed acceptance speech. He referenced the hymn On Eagle's Wings, which is a very cheesy guitar mass hymn that's primarily sung at funerals, which this electrified journalist who've been desperate to show Biden is a real Catholic. Nightmare, you're a devout Catholic. Did this reference finally convince you Biden is just like you?
The fact that he cited like a funeral song, this decrepit old corrupt man cited a funeral song. I hope that there's some sort of I hope that there's some sort of poetry ultimately to that, Scott. And as for your question, absolutely not. I view Biden as kind of this comical clinging to the mid 20th century kind of liberal Catholicism that has numbers but has no enthusiastic support anymore. Aside from just like kind of a dispassionate analysis, it's like my opinion as a Catholic, that like I hope that like everybody who practices Joe Biden's style of Catholicism goes the same way Joe Biden hopefully goes shortly. And I know like the Democrats, it's funny, like the Republicans, it's kind of this classic canard that like, oh, the Republicans, they did the Southern strategy and they turned all these white racist Democrat Southerners into loyal Republican voters. But it's so funny to hear that story told. Well, the truth is actually much more complicated than that. It's not that simple at all. But it's so funny to hear that, and then to have these like dying institutions like the Times and these other kind of ossified media environments talk about Joe Biden as if he represents like any substantial clique of Catholicism in America. Like, in other words, like it's almost like an inverse of the Southern strategy, where like the Democrats now are basically the party of like anti-religion, anti-white Christians, Protestants, Catholics. It doesn't matter whether they're like ethnic Catholic immigrants or whether they're evangelicals in the South. They hate all of the moral precepts of Christianity. They were spearheaded the homosexualist agenda. They're currently spearheading transsexual propaganda. They are the party of abortion, and they can't even say that they're not the party of war anymore, which was their favorite go-to during the Bush years. They're not even the party of peace anymore. People even laugh at Obama now on social media. I see he's known always as this guy who just droned Pakistanis at their weddings and stuff. He can't even escape that. So there is no life issue that the Democrats currently have the moral high ground on at this point, and yet they still have these, what I'm trying to say is these insulting kind of hollowed out skeletal presentations of like, oh, look at this old timey JFK liberal Catholic Democrat. Isn't that so heartwarming? It's like, absolutely not. The flesh and the blood and muscle, the flesh of the Democrat Party has nothing to do with Joe Biden or even his cynical religious appeals. The jig is up. The mask is down. It's like, it's just a cruel joke at this point to even pretend that these people believe in any god other than the people they see when they look in the mirror.
Yeah, they're just a bunch of riggers. That's all I gotta say. We're tired of the riggers. No more of these rigging Democrats. So, yeah, I agree with your point, and it's like the perfect hymn for it. It's like boomer guitar masks, and if you ever had to grow up in these guitar masks, they had the worst music you could ever imagine. That was not inspiring, but it was very inspiring to a type of boomer who just wanted something nice and pleasing. And the song is just like something you would like it was like a rejected song from like a Disney musical. Like that's like the type of musical call. It's not very soaring or inspirational.
Really bad stuff. It's a psyop. Guitar music is a psyop to destroy your spirituality. That's why they play it in church, so you can't pray during it. It's like a white noise machine that they turn on to like crush your interior life while you have to listen to it. It's an absolute disaster. So it's fitting.
Yeah, I hated it as a kid growing up. I don't know why my family brought me to the guitar masses. It was like, it definitely was like, just take me to the normal mass. Like, no, we're going to the guitar mass. It's like, no, I don't want to go to I hated these songs. But
the song is no better on the organ. I'll just let you know. It's absolutely no better when it's played on the organ with no guitar. It's still a terrible, clunky, awful piece of 20th century stuff that just needs to go away forever.
Well, we'll have to see if it does. But now moving on to the highly respected Patreon questions. And there are a couple of questions that we had through, but some of them are no longer out there because there was like asking me about like what state will go, and the answer's already been out there. But we did have a really good question from one patron who asked me, his name is Dave. He asked, Scott, how do you stay so white-pilled? And I was like, well, that is a terrific question. It's like, how do I stay white-pilled? I was like, I get a good night's sleep, always think positively. But no, and I take a lot of white pills in the morning, just have an overdose of them. But it's pretty easy to be. And I think for me, I always think that there is a course going through history, and we are actually on the right side of history. I'm a believer in a higher power, and I believe that this higher power and fate has us winning in the end. And that just keeps it, that keeps me white-pilled. Just that thought is like, we're going to win in the end. And, we're going to have challenges. We're going to have hurdles. We're going to have, some setbacks. There's definitely going to be dark times that we're going to have where we think we had victory and it's dashed before our eyes. But you always have to remember, we will win in the end. The left, it cannot maintain power forever. And also, I don't think people will allow it to have power forever. And you just have to accept. And if you look at the past, I've been involved in politics seriously for about 10 years or so. And the positive developments over time is just astronomical. It's like, I wouldn't have imagined half this stuff occurring just 4 or 5 years ago. We never thought we would be at this point where all our issues are now at the forefront of American political discourse. We didn't think that we would have people booing Indigenous Peoples Day at a popular presidential rally, or that, immigration restriction legislation is actually proposed in the Senate. Of course, it's not going through the Senate, but it's actually a bill proposed by prominent senators, or that we would have a presidential administration that would try to reduce immigration, or, try to attack woke education that's taught in the classroom. We never thought that we'd see that. So a lot of things are going in our direction. Obviously we have more challenges than we did 5 years ago through tech censorship, through leftist hysteria, the possibility of state persecution and other things, but those come with the territory. They're not just going to let us win this fight, easily. They're going to throw things in our way, and you always have to keep an optimistic attitude. Power of positive thinking is real, folks, and just remember, we will win in the end, and you will stay white-pilled too. Nightmare, any additional thoughts on that? How do you stay white-pilled?
Yeah, I know we joked at the beginning that I said that I try to kind of steer away from like that kind of dichotomy, white pill, black pill. And part of the reason I do is because I don't want to have my own, interior life dependent upon what I think is going to happen in the future. And it's not because I have no hope for the future. It's because I'm not in control of the future, and I'm not in control of the course of history. And if anything, over the past 10 years, that, if there's anything we should have learned, it's that oftentimes many things come unlooked for. And in the interim, we are asked to be patient and to have a kind of reverence for our own helplessness in the face of the control of the reins of history. And so the only thing that consoles me is my own perception of good and evil, and right and wrong, and my own judgments of those things. And those are not things I regret having. And so I don't have a kind of positive disposition because I think that some specific good thing is going to happen next week or next month. And I never really think like that. I have a positive disposition personally. I'm very white-pilled, the way people use that term, because I feel as if I have the correct assessment, and I have a good judgment over who is, who has our interests at heart and who doesn't, and who's good and who's bad. And in a way, this might sound weird, but bad people winning doesn't really bother me very much, because in a way, like, bad people can never really win. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a lot of moral support out there for the current system, and that's not an accident. It's because people have, they've begun to realize more and more that there are many things, rotten in the state now. And so I don't know exactly how that's going to manifest, but I think it will continue to. It's not going to go away. It's just a matter of having the patience to, endure, because a lot of us are going to have to. We have had to, so there's no reason why we shouldn't expect to in the future. And so that doesn't bother me at all.
I agree. That's a very white-pilled position. And for all the listeners, you have to stay white-pilled. As I said before, black-pilling is not allowed. We'll have to see how the results turn out, whether Trump can keep on to his victory or whether the steal will be completed. But of course, highly respected. We'll keep an eye on it. But that's all the time for today. Nightmare Vision, it's been great to have you on. You can follow him on Twitter at God Close My Eyes. And any final thoughts?
No, thanks for having me. It was great to be here, and it was kind of great to talk about a lot of this and get it out, because I know a lot of people are probably, you know, they're going through it, they're stressed, they don't know what's going to happen, and you know, I think it's good to kind of just talk to, you know, alleviate some of that and to let people know that, like, take a longer view of things. You know, it's not the end of the world. It never is going to be the end of the world the way people think of it, you know?
I agree. And thanks for those wise words at the end. We'll keep them in mind. So I'll let you go to fly away to your forest hideaway and on owl's wings, you could even say. That's the new that we'll put out there. It'll be cheesy. We'll have a full rock band to perform it at our next church mass. So hopefully we'll see that soon. But anyway, Nightmare, thanks for coming on again.
Great to be here.
You're welcome. And until next time, stay respected.